Hi, I'm Joanne Taeuffer. Today, my husband Jerry Haag and I will be telling you the tale of how Healdsburg went from Mayberry to Beverly Healdsburg, all within my adult lifetime. I'll show you what the Mayberry downtown area looked like in the 1950s and 60s, and Jerry, a professional city planner, will pick up the story and tell you what the Healdsburg did to create what I call Beverly Healdsburg. Now, as a museum docent, I often spent hours poring over old newspapers and other sources to put together a talk like this. But today, I only did a little research, and that's okay because I'm so old, I am history. So let's take a walk around the Plaza of my youth, before RUDAT, before the Redevelopment Agency, and way before Hotel Healdsburg. Let me take you back to what Healdsburg was like when I was a kid in the 1950s and 60s. The Plaza, the once and always center of town, was not so wildly different than today. But if you look way in the back, you can see something that says Market. What was that? A market on Center Street? And what does that say on the next door? Well, you'll soon find out. What you're going to see is a downtown full of local services, practical services. It's a really small town downtown. It's definitely Mayberry RFD. And we'll start on the corner of Matheson Street and Healdsburg Avenue, or as it was called before 1960, West Street. So this is the International Order of Oddfellows building, which by the time I can remember was mostly known as the Brandt Building. And Brandt Insurance was located on the ground floor. And then a little further along on Matheson Street was Garrett's, a really jam-packed hardware store. It was located on the plaza from 1889 until 1976, almost 90 years. And these were also the days of parking meters, which you can see out in front. And a little further along, the Cruise Building. This was built in 1900 and was repaired after the big earthquake. And there were local services in the Cruise Building, like an insurance agency and Decker's Florist. Upstairs, there was the Langhart Photo Studio, and George Izett, the school band leader, had practice space for music lessons. He tried to teach me how to play the flute, and even though he was a wonderful man and a really good teacher, he failed. Maybe that was my bad. Next door was Ed Merhammer's chiropractic office. And then on the corner of Matheson and Center Street was our first dedicated city hall. In 1886, the town of Healdsburg, thinking it was pretty swell, levied a tax to build this Richardsonian Romanesque city hall and courthouse. This is maybe the most impressive public building ever to grace Healdsburg. Upstairs was a courthouse, and there was library space and on the ground floor, and also room for old-time fire wagons. By the time I was a kid, our Bluebird meetings were being held in the courtrooms upstairs. We used to sit in the jury box to have our meetings. And Bob Tingstrom also said the Boy Scouts met in those courtrooms. But by 1960, the building is torn down because it no longer is the pride of the town. Even the small city staff is crowded in this building because a lot of the lower floor was used for old fire wagons, and the second floor were those courtrooms, good for Bluebird meetings, but not so good for offices. There had also been a fire in the building next door, and there was fire damage in the attic of the city hall. And there was also concern about earthquake safety, especially since the damage from the big 1906 earthquake had probably not been all properly repaired. But most of all, in my humble opinion, the city fathers wanted a modern version of Healdsburg. So they built this mid-century modern city hall. This is the idea of a modern post-war town. And it was leaders like Ed Langhart, Art Renovara, Doug Badger, and Felix Lafon who created this city hall. Now, I can remember my high school social studies class having a moot city council meeting in the council chambers here to learn about city government. And it was a good thing that they did that, because a year or so later, I was the junior reporter at the Healdsburg Tribune while I went to JC, and I ended up sometimes covering city council meetings, so I knew what they were about. And then on to Center Street. We'll make a turn here and go on Center Street. The first building was the post office, and there's a little plaque over the doorway. That plaque is an eagle, United States eagle. And then next to it, the paint store, and then Plaza Market. And then further on was Western Auto. Now, this photo was taken in 1956 when the Catholic Church was doing their blessing of the animals, and that's what's going on in the foreground. But in the background, you can see that Western Auto was on that street. And a little further down, more important for me, was Melody Music Store. This was a small shop with a soundproof room in the back where you could go to listen to your records before buying them. And when I was not quite a teenager, my first record ever, James Darren, Goodbye Cruel World. That's the actual record on the left. My youngest sister, Jeannie, the family historian, is the guardian of the family records, paper, and 45 RPM. And the next store, right on the corner of Plaza, was Molly Thrift's Little Folk Shop. These are Easter outfits, April 1957. And the newspaper article affixed to the rear of the photo says, Linda Thrift, Becky Waddles, Carl Thrift model what the young folks will be wearing this Easter from the Little Folks Shop. Now, my grandmother thought I should be wearing these adorable, roughly cotton dresses. And my mother thought dungarees and t-shirts were more appropriate for our life on the farm. The main issue was, who will iron these cotton ruffly dresses if we have them? Well, my grandmother said that she would. So my mother bought some of these dresses. I got to wear them, and when they were washed, she would bundle them up and take them to my grandmother's house to be ironed. And we were all happy. Now, on down Center Street, there were a number of other important stores, Wayne Scott's Stationery, and then there was the Meat Locker, there was Purity Market, Merle's Men's Clothing, the Home Bakery, and around the corner on North Street was Rosenberg and Bush, which was an important department store in town between 1865 and 1985. And this is where you bought black farmer jeans and school clothes. You bought your Campfire Girl outfits and your gym clothes. But let's turn instead on Plaza Street, which actually had been renamed in 1956 from Powell Street. Ransom Powell, one of our city fathers, was so famous that he had two streets, an avenue and a street named for him, and Plaza was renamed to avoid the confusion. Now, the first building on Plaza is this wonderful Greek Revival Farmers and Mechanics Bank building. It was built after the 1906 earthquake, and it had been a bank until 1929, and then it had many uses, including some living space, including a hardware store, a creamery, and the Wilkie for President campaign offices. The one thing I remember as a kid was the Christian Science Reading Room, which was on the ground floor of this building on Center Street. There was other commercial space and professional offices upstairs. And then on past the bank building, we have the Florsheim Shoe Store. That was Schwab Brothers Shoes. We have Vic and Sis's Bar, and then we have General Drugs. And then on the corner of Plaza and Healdsburg Avenue, the Bank of America, the main bank when I was a kid, and the last one on the plaza. Now, this is what the interior of a bank is supposed to look like, in my humble opinion, right? And then on Healdsburg Avenue, which had just been renamed West Street in 1960, and starting at North Street, we have Quimby's gas station. And this was one of many gas stations along Healdsburg Avenue because it was Highway 101 and people were driving north right through town. They needed gas. And this was almost the end of civilization on that highway. So it was a good place to get gas. Across the street from Quinby's was the Art Renovara gas station. And then on down Healdsburg Avenue to the south, first an empty lot that used to be where the Sodiomi Hotel was. There were two fancy three-story hotels built on West Street in the 1850s and 60s, and this was one of them. It had been torn down in 1956. And then this building, upstairs was office space. Downstairs, you can see the doors. They have diamond-shaped windows. I'm sure that this was a bar. I don't know exactly because I was too young to even be too young to drink at the time. But there were a number of bars along here, and one of them was the Hells Angel Bar. So every Saturday, the Hells Angels would come into town on their hogs, and they would be parked all along Healdsburg Avenue. And sometimes there were fights and a lot of noise. It was a Wild Wild West kind of place. And then Rose Catalini Pavoni's Diner, the office. Upstairs there were law offices. This is where Plaza Street runs into Healdsburg Avenue. Medico drugstore. And then the second of the two big fancy three-story hotels from the 1800s, the original Union Hotel, which was now called the Plaza Hotel. And when I was young, it was deteriorating. It was in rough shape, and it was an SRO hotel, and ultimately it would be closed by the fire marshal. Moda Day, women's clothing. Further down, there was another women's clothing store, Shelford's, which was a little bit nicer women's clothes. And we also had a Montgomery Ward catalog store. Now, this was on West Street, the west side of Healdsburg Avenue, north of North Street. And you went to this store to put your order in for a catalog item, and then you went to pick it up when the catalog item came. I'm not sure why they didn't just use Amazon Prime, but okay. Now, in those days, we did actually have some home delivery services. We had a milkman, and we also had a McNess man. Now, McNess man was a traveling salesman for the first McNess Company, which was a household and agricultural products business founded in 1908 in Illinois. And these were the quintessential door-to-door salesmen. They brought goods to rural communities and farmers across America during the first half of the 20th century. My mother used to buy from her McNess man shampoo, cream rinse, hairbrushes, I think some spices, and I think vanilla. Now, one of the things you wouldn't see anywhere on the plaza or anywhere else in town was wine tasting. So wine tasting idea was kind of in its infancy, and it wasn't like it is today. The Italian-Swiss Colony Tasting Room in Asti was a top tourist attraction in Sonoma County in the 1950s and 60s. And this was the advertising photo, and this is what the actual place looked like. Now, in 1962, I was at this tasting room. That summer, my father's old Army buddy had brought his family to visit us from Kansas. And so, of course, we went to this top tourist attraction. It was large and casual, and behind the bar was Mr. Hornlin, who was a fifth grade teacher at Healdsburg Elementary School. He was doing his summer job. Now, the wine wasn't what you'd think of as wine these days. It was sort of largely dessert wine and sometimes flavored. I seem to remember coffee and sort of a not too natural strawberry flavor. So when we were at the winery that day, my mother took a sip of her sample and she turned to me and said, "Would you like to try this?" Well, Mr. Hornlin went ballistic. But you can forgive my mother this faux pas because the drink hardly actually tasted like a glass of wine. Now, even when I was still young, things were beginning to change in Healdsburg. One of the town's oldest buildings was the American Legion Hall at Center Street, and the end of World War II, the boys came home, and the American Legion Hall was a meeting place for them. I can remember being in this building, especially one night when there was a magician doing a performance on stage in the auditorium. I was invited up on the stage to be the magician's assistant, probably because my father was the commander of the post that year. And my 6 or 7-year-old self was just delighted. And today I'm still on stage doing these talks at the Plaza during the summer. The American Legion Hall is going to make way for a late 1950s shopping center, part of the post-war boom. And here it is. The Mitchell Center opened with a J.C. Penney's and many other services, and businesses started to move away from the plaza to this more auto-friendly location. Now, things would continue to change in Healdsburg, but before the changes accelerated, I left town in 1970 for good. I went to Cal, and then I was going onward to my life and career. And to tell you what the city did after I left that facilitated the transformation of our town from Mayberry to Beverly Healdsburg, my city planner husband, Jerry Haag, will take up the narrative. You can hear his talk by clicking over there. Enjoy.